All right, let's get started. I'm just putting the link to the slides we're going to be using today in the chat in case you want to reference them later. But welcome to the Educational Interpreter Grant Kickoff meeting. We're so glad that we were able to provide these funds for your educational interpreters to get some training. So my name is Mackenzie Dyer. I am a program specialist at PESB, and I've been working very closely with my colleague, Michael, to work on this grant. So I'll let Michael introduce himself.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you are all warm and safe wherever you're at, or you have a safe travel home after today. My name is Michael Nguyen. I am a program manager with the Professional Educator Standards Board, and we are happy to be here. Hopefully, I don't think today's presentation is going to take the full hour. We are recording it, and we'll send out to everybody the link to the slide deck and the recording afterward as well. So you are welcome to refer back to it if you have any questions, or you can feel free to email us. But yeah, and I'll pass it off to, well, why don't I just continue right here? So just a quick request that we are going to keep it pretty informal today. We have the presentation ready to go, but we just ask that you stay muted, but feel free to, we'll be monitoring the chat while this presentation goes on. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, type a question in the chat if it comes up, and we will do our best to address it. And we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end of the presentation for questions. So we just wanted to start off our meeting with a land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that no matter where each of us are physically, we are on the traditional land of Native Americans, whose ancestors were the original inhabitants. As we proceed with our work, let's make sure that our deliberations and recommendations benefit their descendants equitably. This map here shows the 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington State, and we're also aware that there are tribes that are not listed on here that are not federally recognized. So just wanted to keep that in mind. We also wanted to acknowledge the history of this nation with a moment of silence. So the history of this nation is one fraught with contradictions, and for too long, our country has elevated a story of democracy and freedom while minimizing the impact of violence and oppression on marginalized communities on whose backs this nation was built. Today, members of our Black and Asian communities and other communities of color continue to experience racism through police brutality, mass incarceration, inequitable education and health services, deportation, and other forms of subjugation. We aim to disrupt the legacy of systemic racism by centering racial justice and equity in our work. This is how we stand with our communities of color. And so before we begin, we wanted to offer a moment of silence to consider these words and how you might join us in this work. Thank you.
As we begin today, we just wanted to give you a big congratulations for receiving this grant, and we're really excited to support you as you support the educational interpreters in your school district or your school. So congratulations, it's very exciting. And I'll pass it back to Michael.
So just to make it a little bit interactive, we have a smallish group here. If you could open up the chat box and introduce yourself. You can type in your name, pronouns, your organization or school district that you're a part of, your role, and your favorite holiday dish as sort of a fun question. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes and we'll see who else is in the Zoom meeting here. And I'll type mine as an example as well. Thanks everyone for indulging us in some of your personal favorite dishes, and you're welcome to keep moving along here. It's nice to see folks from all across the state that have been awarded this grant as well. So whether you come from the east side or the west side or anywhere in between. All right, so just a little introduction about who we are. Some folks don't even really know who PESB is. So the Professional Educator Standards Board, we are a small government agency, and our role is really focused on the educator workforce. So we actually are staff for two different boards. The Professional Educator Standards Board, which works with our certificated staff, teachers, counselors, principals, administrators, and so on. And then the paraeducator board sets standards for our paraeducators across the states. And you can see here that our mission is really to strengthen that workforce through standards, policy, innovation. We are also responsible for approval of our preparation programs across the states. And this grant fits in. We were tasked at administering this grant because of our role in setting the standards for educational interpreters across the states. So just a little bit about this one-time funding grants. In October of 2020, our agency convened a work group to discuss credentialing for educators of the deaf. Based on that result of that work group, they decided that a second work group was needed specifically to discuss standards for educational interpreters, the role of educational interpreters for the deaf. And so that work group convened starting in April of 2021. Based on the results of these work groups, our board raised the minimum EIPA score to 4.0 at their September 2021 meeting. Attached to that, the legislature saw that because of the increased requirement on this assessment, they decided to award in a proviso with Senate Bill 5693 funding to assist educational interpreters in meeting these new minimum requirements.
Thanks, Michael. So that those proviso funds were meant to offer $2,000 grants to reimburse school districts for professional development activities for employees in the role of educational interpreters to train to meet those standards. So you probably already know that because you've received this grant, but it's $2,000 per person in the role of educational interpreter in your school district. And this supports PESB's vision of an equity-minded educator workforce to facilitate learning and growth for every student in our schools. So a little bit about the grant, and you might already know this information, but the grantee, so your organization, will support your educational interpreters in training to meet those standards that were passed. So the standards are listed in this RCW, and it's linked in the slides if you feel like you want to go read that. But what that RCW says is that educational interpreters need to have a passing score on the EIPA written test, as well as an EIPA score of 3.5, which will be a 4.0 beginning July 1st, or the National Interpreter Certification from the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. One thing to note is that since this is a one-year proviso, all funds must be spent before June 30th, 2023. So it's just a one-year grant, all funds spent by June 30th. So a little bit about what the grant funds may be used for. They can be used for a wide variety of activities to help educational interpreters meet those minimum requirements, including professional development, mentoring, training, You can use the money for paid time to attend those trainings and mentor opportunities. You can use the funds to get substitutes to allow educational interpreters to access that professional development, as well as to pay for courses offered at institutions of higher education located in Washington. And then the funds can also be used for assessment fees to take the IPA assessment, as well as retakes to try to meet those standards. And then other activities is defined by PESB. So if there's something on this list that you're not sure about, you can reach out to us and we can work on answering that question of how the funds may be used.
So thanks to our partners at the Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Youth, another state agency located in Southwest Washington. They were able to compile a list of possible activities that would be eligible for the grant funding. And so even though I know many of you have an intent that's written on your grant application, if you have remaining funds, if you have others who might be interested in it, there is this list here and it's linked. We will reach back out to the Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Youth to update that list. Some of these activities have passed, but that is also a nice starting point to get some ideas on ways that you can use that. Again, the funds must be spent by the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th, 2023. We have received some questions around other potential uses of funds. And so we just wanted to call out, based on our interpretation of the proviso, these are some things that the funds may not be used for. So the first is, this is grant funding that is intended for educational interpreters for the deaf and not for multilingual interpreters. That's a different category, and there's different work going on in that sector right now. So this is specifically for interpreters for the deaf. And the other question that we've been getting more frequently is around travel expenses. So the proviso does not lay out that travel expenses. However, you can use the funding for things compensating folks who are traveling, substitutes to cover for that day. So the funds can be used for the time that employees are using for training.
So can I just be clear that the only way to take the EIPA performance is to travel to Spokane, Washington or Vancouver, Washington. So if you live anywhere outside of that, we cannot use these funds, because I've got 13 interpreters that need to go take this.
So I'll just add one other thing, is that there are two of us who are administering this grant. And so there's not going to be much capacity in terms of checking, in terms of we are saying that based on our interpretation of the proviso, travel expenses are not listed under what the funds are allowed to be used for, but based on what we've read, you can use it to compensate folks as well as the staff for any folks who are missing. So. And I'll pass it back to Mackenzie.
Thanks. So a little bit about the grant timeline. Up until this point, we're here at the yellow bar for this kickoff meeting. And so you've completed most things. The next deadline really is to spend your funds by June 30th. In a minute, I'll talk about a post survey at the very end of the grant period. We will also ask you to complete a post survey, just a brief survey to see, to collect some data about how you use the funds and any feedback that you have about this grant. So after today, your job really is to spend the funds. And actually, I'll have Michael go to the next grant, or the next slide, sorry. So you will also need to go into iGrants to claim the grant. So what you'll need to do is have your iGrants administrator go into grants and agree to the grant assurances and complete the budget. in iGrants. And this is for form package 227. I forgot to put it on this slide, but it's form package 227. And so once you complete the assurances and budget in iGrants, we will approve those. So you can do that as soon as possible. And then a little bit about iGrants. iGrants is a system run by OSPI that organizes and distributes grant funds, including this grant. So your district administrator will need to go, your district iGrants administrator will need to go and claim these grant funds. And if you have questions about that, you can ask me, or there's an email address on slide 15 about that. So after you claim the grant in iGrants, you will begin your grant activities. And then as you spend your money, the school district will school district will submit grant claims for reimbursement through OSPI's grant claims system. And this system information is linked here on this slide. And if you run into problems with that system, you will have to contact Michelle Sartain, whose email is also on this slide.
Mackenzie, can I ask a quick
Yes.
question?
Yes.
This is Karen from Puyallup. On the slide 14, you also had on the timeline the second round of grant applications due. So
Yep.
one of my wonderings is, if we have 20 interpreters right now, that's part of this current grant, but say I hire 2 more, I can go ahead and do that for the second submission?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that part. Yes. So yeah, we are reopening the grant. There are grant funds left over. So you can, if you have more interpreters that are interested, feel free to reapply. And then if you have colleagues in other school districts as well, please let them know too.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that, what Mackenzie said, our job is to try to spend all this money. And we are not there yet, even with this first round. And so we reopened the application for another 2 months. I know there's a holiday in between, but as long as it's the second round, will close on February 1st, and then we'll process those that second round of folks. So if you have others that you know of, just please reapply, and we're trying to spend as much of it as we can. Otherwise, it just goes back to the state general fund.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's a little, I know the state budget ends June 30th, but there's so much opportunity for summer training, because to do training during the school year to pull people out of school when they're working with the kids. I mean, and then someone mentioned earlier, can you pay for registrations? My experience has been yes, as long as the money's spent by June 30th. It's just the salary piece of that. Working on a school district, budget timeline versus the state timeline would be extremely helpful. But I mean, you probably have no ability to carry that over given the language of the funds. But that's, we didn't know about it in time to do anything last summer. So.
Yeah, the timing is it's just sort of unfortunate the way the state budget lines up with the school district budgets. But yes, if you can register before June 30th and spend the funds before June 30th, that is great. But yeah, we can't extend, the funding goes away after June 30th, unfortunately. So this is on this slide is the post survey I mentioned. We will send you a post survey in late May just to gather some feedback and thoughts, and that should be pretty short and simple. So just something to watch out for.
I think that's the last slide. I see a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing real quick so that we can go back to that. So Shauna's question, can we register for a workshop before June 30th, but the workshop happens in the summer? I think the answer is yes, as long as the funds get spent by June 30th. I have a question, a direct question to me that says, actually, I'm going to send it to you, Mackenzie. The budget portion is completed in iGrants. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So when you go do your budget in iGrants, you can just claim $2,000 per interpreter.
Carrie has,
Typically on an I-grants, you have to assign what you're going to use it for, how much for salary, how much for benefits, how much for workshop registration. But like if I got approved for 12 people, I'd have $24,000, but I'm going to have to put it in all of those different cells.
Yes, so just do your best to fill in those cells the best you, because all the cells are in there in iGrants like they usually are. So do your best to fill those in, but we understand that things like salary or the registration fee might change. So just do your best and we will work with it.
Carrie has a question about the training list. Yes, I will set up a meeting with Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Youth, who is the one who originally curated that list. We also have a contact at Spokane Falls Community College, who I know also has a really strong training program out on the east side. And so we will get them both to add and to update that list for you all. And the link will stay the same. So, and we'll send out a notice once that's updated. So that's my goal, to do that before the break. Carrie has a question. Can we set up a stipend for staff participation within this grant, or is hour by hour each month for the budgets?
You can set up a stipend. You don't have to do hour by hour. You can set up a stipend and then submit that stipend for reimbursement.
And Tracy has a question. If staff are not yet hired as interpreters, but are enrolled in classes to become an interpreter, can they be added to the training? Definitely. So the proviso specifically says anyone who is an educational interpreter or training to become an educational interpreter.
Thank you. Sorry, I must have missed that. I thought it just said interpreters. So I might need to do an addition.
Right. I'm going to stop the recording.